And the breakthrough deal to pause the brutal and bloody 7-week-old war in West Asia is scheduled to begin today, in just a few hours from now. The first truce in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war reached after mediation by Qatar. It will facilitate the release of at least 50 hostages held by Hamas militants in exchange for at least 150 Palestinians jailed in Israel. And according to Qatar, the 4-day ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas will begin today. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson announced the ceasefire will start at 7 a.m. local time. He said that the two sides had exchanged a list of those to be released, and the first group of 13 women and children held by Hamas would be freed by Friday afternoon. Take a listen.
We have just finished with all the communication with all parties in order to ascertain the lists of those civilians who will be freed as a result of the deal agreed upon by both parties. The lists have been handed to both sides, and finally, in a communication just now, the list has been handed to the Israeli intelligence service, the Mossad, in order to facilitate the implementation of the deal.
Although it did not say how many Palestinians jailed in Israel would be freed. But according to Israeli Army radio, the first batch of 39 Palestinian prisoners will be released at about 1800 GMT, and that this will only occur if the hostages held in Gaza are on Israeli soil. The diplomatic breakthrough promised some relief for the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza who have endured weeks of Israeli bombings since October 7. That's when the war started. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi also praised the ceasefire agreement. Egypt, which often plays as peace broker between the warring sides, has pushed for a ceasefire since the war erupted on October 7th. Take a listen.
وقد تكللت الجهود المصرية المشتركة مع الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية والأشقاء القطريين في الوصول لاتفاق هدنة إنسانية لمدة 4 أيام قابلة للتمديد، وآمل أن يبدأ تنفيذها في الأيام القادمة دون تأخير أو تسويف.
Meanwhile, internationally, humanitarian aid trucks were waiting to enter the Gaza Strip from Egypt ahead of the imminent truce ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The long line of trucks, they have been parked up in El Arish and are waiting for approval to head towards the Rafah crossing with Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gathered his top security officials together late on Thursday for a meeting of the war cabinet. The meeting came just hours ahead of a 4-day ceasefire in Gaza. Israeli President Isaac Herzog met with the newly appointed UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron, who was making his first visit to Israel since taking over the job. Cameron also said that the humanitarian pause in the war was an opportunity to get aid into Gaza, further adding that the UK would help with that as well. Take a listen.
Of course, all hostages must come out, because hostage-taking is immoral and wrong and a terrorist tactic. And some of them are British hostages, so we have a strong interest with you. But I think this humanitarian pause is also an opportunity to get aid into Gaza.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and Belgian Prime Minister, they also visited southern Israeli communities attacked by Hamas militants. Sanchez, wearing a flak jacket, walked through debris and into a home that was burnt during the attack last month. The two leaders also held a meeting with the director of the Civil Commission for the crime committed by the militant group Hamas. Meanwhile, at the war front, the Israeli military released footage of a strike that it said killed a Hamas commander. The IDF said that the strike killed Ammar Abu Jalala, who is the commander of the Hamas naval forces in Khan Younis. And according to the reports, the Israeli airstrike in Khan Younis killed at least 4 people. A severely wounded boy was among the injured brought to the city's Nasser hospital to be treated.
نتنفس شويه.
While an airstrike in Nusrat refugee camp in central Gaza killed at least 12 people, including children. The dead bodies that were recovered have been taken to the Al-Aqsa hospital there.
فجأة ضربوا البيت على الأطفال على الصغار على كل البيت دمروه. يعني هذا هو الاحتلال. بقتل الصغار والأولاد والنساء والأطفال. هذول هم اللي بقاوموا، هذول اللي بحاربوا، اللي في دورهم آمنين صغار أطفال في فوق 30 طفل في الدار.
And for more on this, we're now being joined by Mark Merowitz from New York. He is a professor at State University of New York Maritime College. Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Merowitz.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Now, it is a major breakthrough in the ongoing war. The 4-day pause is set to begin in just a short while from now, and the truce was expected to begin on Thursday, and it got delayed by a day. Now, there is nothing certain right now at the moment. It seems like a house of cards. Even if one thing goes out of line, the whole deal will come down crashing. How optimistic are you regarding this truce?
Well, I'm mildly optimistic and hopeful, and mostly hopeful, because what we're dealing with here are monstrous thugs who killed thousands, kidnapped women and babies, little babies and little children. Can you imagine that? I have little grandchildren. Can you imagine that? Kidnapping little babies and little children and raping and murdering people, and then using that as a political card to get a political benefit. So as we know from the previous history of Hamas's ceasefires, they often break them. They are not worthy for their word. Their word isn't worth anything. They are terrorists and they are liars. So as I said, I'm hopeful and I'm praying very much for this, that it will come true. But at the same time, even if they release the 50 hostages, what about the rest of the hostages? And why is it that the Red Cross is not being given access to the hostages? That in itself is a war crime. So it's a war crime upon a war crime, and it's a hideous event, and that the world should be ashamed to allow this to continue in this way. And that is what I think about it.
Mr. Merowitz, the situation is complex right now, like you mentioned, keeping in mind especially how both the sides don't speak to each other. And Hamas has also made it clear that they will increase the fight on all the fronts. Do you think that the truce will intensify the war further after it resumes? Because the Hamas militants will have time to regroup during the 4-day ceasefire. What is your opinion on this?
Well, you know, it's really unknown. I mean, we don't know. I don't think that Israel really had a lot of options here. A lot of people have analyzed this and said it's a bad deal. It's not a good deal. But the fact of the matter is, from the point of view of saving the hostages, that's the #1 priority in Israel. And at the same time, the humanitarian aid will be very, very helpful for the people of Gaza. So those parts of it are quote unquote good. But where do we go from here after this? Hopefully, this will be the beginning of the release of all the hostages. But is that the case? Hard to know. So I think that we're really at a very uncertain point here. You know, I think that you're negotiating with terrorists, very tricky, very difficult. I think that Qatar gets a certain amount of thanks for having been involved in negotiating this. And I think that everyone in the world is hopeful that this will be brought to fruition. But the chances are, based on the previous ceasefires with Hamas and pauses, that they don't observe them. By the way, as I understand it, there was a ceasefire in effect on October 6th, and yet Hamas launched this raid on October 7th. So we're going to hold ourselves in a moment of prayer and hope that this will go through and continue to go through and not be not be canceled at any point, and that we can get the women and the children out and transfer and do the exchanges that have been proposed, and that this will just be the beginning of the release of all of the hostages. The other problem is that, as I understand it, many of the hostages can't be located. I mean, this is a tragedy upon a tragedy.
Mr. Merowitz, just a follow-up to that, how do you think the hostages will be released? Rule of 50 hostages will be released in the span of next 4 days, but what priority or value are the Hamas militants they are giving to the hostages?
You mean the exchanges in Israel, you're saying? Yeah. The exchanges of prisoners? Well, no, I mean, I think in the first group is women and teenagers and children who have been held in prison in Israel. And there's no parity between the two, in the sense that you have innocent civilians who have been kidnapped from Israel, not only Israelis, people from Thailand, there may even be some in India, I don't know, but from many different countries, from Nepal and others, British citizens as well, all kinds of people, even Muslims, Arabs were kidnapped, many Arabs were killed in the attack. The people in prison who are being exchanged are there because they committed crimes and were involved in terrorism. Indeed, it's interesting to note that in a previous prisoner exchange, which was done for Gilad Shalit, which was one Israeli soldier for over 1,000 prisoners in prison in Israel, one of those Palestinians released was Yahya Sinwar, who is the leader and the mastermind of the raid on October 7th. And can you believe it, that the doctors in Israel saved this individual who had brain cancer and saved him and provided him medical assistance. And then he went back in this exchange and led the attack on October 7th. Yes. I mean, yes. This is beyond just despicable of what is going on here. And I hope and pray for peace, obviously, in the future.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us and beyond, Mr. Merowitz, and sharing insights with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.